Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the greatest games on the Blizzard. My name is Marcus Speller. With me, of course, is Jonathan Wilson. And with us today is Maher Mezahi, a football journalist based in Algiers, covering North African football with contributions to the BBC, The Guardian, The Telegraph, Al Jazeera, and many, many more. Maher, an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast.
The pleasure is all mine. I've listened to a few of these now, and I've really admired them for a long time now. So I'm really pumped to talk about the match that I've picked out.
Well, I hope you are indeed, good sir, because you've picked one of the most controversial and highly charged encounters we've ever had on this podcast. And we've had a few. We have had a few, but this one, well, we'll let the listeners decide, see if it takes a biscuit. We go back to the 18th of November, 2009. Algeria 1, Egypt 0. Maher, why have you chosen this game?
For me, it honestly has all the perfect elements of a rivalry. The two teams are fairly equal. I think Egypt are arguably the most successful national team in Africa, with the amount of African Cup of Nations titles that they have. But if you take World Cup performances into the equation, Algeria have had much more impressive performances in the World Cup. And they've also, I think, produced better players. So I think they're fairly equal national team sides, that they're both two African heavyweights. The passion, you have that sort of Mediterranean style of support, where it's very like virile, rhythmic, almost warlike at times. In Algeria, at times I've marveled at 50-year-old fathers who cuss out the lineage of a player because of a misplaced pass. Sometimes things go overboard, but there is that passion there. And I think there's a little bit of hatred, or at least disdain, between the two nations. There are a fair amount of cultural differences. So for me, all the perfect elements of a rivalry, and it sort of all came to a head on November 18th, 2009.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of hatred is perhaps an understatement. There was a lot of hatred during these games, Jonathan.
This game, we should sort of say, this is a World Cup qualifying playoff. So, and we'll get into the exact details of how they got to this position. But Egypt and Algeria finished level on points, level on goal difference, level on goals scored. So they have a playoff. So this ends up being the third game out of 4 games in 8 months. So they twice in World Cup qualifying, then the World Cup qualifying playoff, and then they meet again in the semi-final of the Cup of Nations in Benguela in Angola, which I was at. And that game is, I would say, one of the most extraordinary games I've ever been at, for a whole number of reasons, which we'll get into. But yeah, this game, I think it's fair to say it's not in itself a great game, but it is the high point of this extraordinary sequence of 4 matches, which themselves sort of derive their importance because of what had happened 20 years before that. So all the way through, we're going to be kind of going back to explain context. But yeah, it's and you watch the footage and you can just tell by everybody's reactions, by the crowd reaction, how highly charged everything was.
Yeah. Where to begin? Let's begin with what sort of defined the rivalry, because sometimes it is geographical, of course, a rivalry, and sometimes there are particular incidents. So Maher, what creates this rivalry? Obviously, in terms of geography, they're close by to each other. Were there particular incidents in the past as well that caused this game to be a particularly spicy one?
Yeah, look, on paper, you have 2 fairly large military powers in North Africa, same language, same religion, both part of the Arab Union, or the Arab League, the African Union. On paper, they should be fairly close countries that get along, but there's always been sort of an inferiority complex from the Algerian side for a few separate reasons. I mean, diplomatically, they've gotten along because Egypt, under their sort of most famous president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, he was a big help to the Algerian War of Independence in terms of sending arms, support, and even welcoming a lot of Algerian refugees, including Algeria's first president, Ahmed Ben Bella. So Egypt was always a sort of ally, at least from a political sense, to Algeria. But there are fairly large cultural differences. Egyptians in Algeria are sort of seen as like snooty, as like obnoxious, theatrical, dramatic, because they have like a huge cinema culture, there's a lot of art scene. They see us as sort of rustic, unsophisticated. Egyptians call themselves Dunya, which means the mother of the world, is a literal translation, but it means the cradle of civilization. They like to bring that up, like we're this ancient civilization with all this culture and sophistication. And you guys are just, rural peoples that fought for your independence, pretty much. So those are the main cultural differences. But in football, if I could just touch on this really quickly, the Algerian national team actually predates Algerian independence. So the first Algerian national team was unofficial, and it was created in 1958 from players that were playing in France for clubs like Lyon, Saint-Etienne at the time were obviously a very, very big club. Monaco as well. So you had even 2, 3, 4 French internationals that actually left their French clubs and created what they called the FLN team, the FLN being the political front that was fighting for Algerian independence. And the FLN team was based in Tunis, and they actually traveled around the world and played more than 90 matches trying to raise awareness for Algerian independence. Egypt at the time was the new home to the Confederation of African Football, which was only created in 1957. So it was only 2 years old when the FLN team in 1959 tried to go to Egypt to play a match to try and raise awareness for Algerian independence. Egypt, because of the precarious situation at the time, they wanted to establish themselves as the African superpower in football. CAF headquarters are in Cairo. They refused to play that match. And that really left a sour taste in terms of football. Again, politically, Egypt were clear allies, but in terms of football, because the players that ended up playing for the FLN team ended up being very, very influential in the Algerian national team post-independence. For example, Rachid Makhloufi, who was the star, was the coach during the 1982 World Cup. So they had always felt very, I don't know, they felt some type of way about going to Egypt and being turned away without playing a single match because Egypt was scared that FIFA would sanction them if they played against the FLN team.
I mean, football fans seldom forget these things as well. You know, some of the great rivalries, they remember results and incidents all the way down the years. And so 1958, as you say, that extraordinary, really. There's a piece of history football history that I had no idea about. I did quite like the nickname of that side, the 11 of Independence, which I thought which was quite a nice name. But fast forward, and something that you brought to our attention as well, in the 1984 Olympic qualifiers. Now, this is where I think we you have that piece of history with regards to independence and so on and so forth. This is a bit more in your face, I would say, for all literal and metaphoric reasons. So set the scene for us. By 1984, the Olympic qualifiers, there was a game between these two sides.
Yeah, just a game to qualify to the Olympics. I believe the first leg in Algeria was a draw, and Algeria needed to win, or at least not lose by a 1-0, which they ended up doing in that 1984 Olympic qualifier. And late in the match, I believe it was Jamal Zidane, he goes up for a header and he gets, elbowed by an Egyptian player who...
He gets assaulted. Let's call it what it is.
It was like a run-up elbow into the back of the head. And then as the Egyptian player was running away, another Algerian forward, I think, sort of slapped him. And then the camera cuts away and we just see the crowd. And you
need a wide shot at that point of what's all going on.
Right. And I mean, the camera, the television crew, I think, kind of let us down. But you just hear 2 or 3 seconds later, you hear the commentator go, up, 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 up. You just know something is going on. And it cuts back, and the first thing you see is an Egyptian player running away from a group of Algerian players, and somebody comes out of nowhere, and he's parallel to the ground, 2-foot stud. Sort of jump kick right into the midsection. Another Egyptian player runs from the left of the screen at the Algerian players. I think throws a jumping knee, and he gets a jumping knee to the face. Somebody gets kicked on the floor, and then the Algerian right back, Shaban El-Merskan, I think a minute later, you just see him running with the corner flag, which of course has like a sharp metallic pointed edge at the bottom. Yeah. So he grabbed that like a javelin, like he was going to attack somebody, and thankfully somebody stepped in and cooler heads prevailed. But that was, was intense. Yeah.
Jonathan, sometimes in football, things are described as a brawl when there's a bit of pushing and shoving and so on. And, the Premier League's never seen a brawl really, because that was it's very nasty, ugly scenes, of course, but flipping heck, it was like a war zone.
Yeah, it's the flying kicks, which is the incredible thing. I don't know, there's something... I don't know why this should be the case, but it does appear to be the case that when you see what the Manchester United Arsenal brawl in '91 when they both get docked points, that's a load of people sort of standing around pushing each other. The odd punch gets thrown. Yeah, nobody's doing the flying kicks.
No.
But you look at, say, the Barcelona Athletic fight from '84.
Maradona involved?
Maradona,
yeah, of course,
yeah. Sorry, yeah. Started
and that's all flying kicks. So this flying kick is a very un-British thing, but yeah, this is. I mean, it's a. I suppose a brawl is the right word, but it's very different to a British football understanding of what brawl means.
Yeah,
and then of course this all provides the context for.
Are you suggesting that? Are you suggesting that once again we're sort of lagging behind?
I think we got a lot to learn.
Well, yeah. So anyway,
and this all provides the context for '89 and the. I guess the sort of the real sort of centerpiece of it, the thing that sort of really provides the backdrop to these games. So the World Cup qualifier in '89, when Egypt win to qualify for the World Cup, but of course Egypt go on to be in England's group in that World Cup in 1990. But Algeria were furious with the referee, and things unfold, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean that was an explosive incident again, Maher, but it was involving Algeria's probably the best ever player, Lakhdar Baloumi, who bottled an Egyptian doctor in a fight after the game in the hotel, I believe, and permanently blinded him. So this is a huge incident. That's all joking aside. That is incredibly, dreadful, really.
That was definitely, I think, a little uglier because there was permanent damage. Somebody's life has changed.
Yeah, exactly.
And Lakhdar Baloumi had always denied that it was him that threw the bottle. He said, I think he blamed it on the Algerian goalkeeper, actually, which sort of created a weird, awkward situation between the two of them. But he was the subject of an Interpol search warrant for a very long time, until actually 2009, when these teams met again ahead of the 2010 World Cup qualifiers. So one of the things I think that really sort of adds fuel to the flames when it comes to these matches is there's that goal of qualifying for the World Cup. And for Egypt in 1990, they hadn't qualified since 1934, that was their only prior participation, or I think they had played a playoff, I think against the Palestinian territories or something like that, and they smashed them 11-1. So even like me personally, and I think a lot of different African football supporters or aficionados or whatever you want to call us, I don't really consider that a qualification. So this was 1990 for them. I think was the first real time they could really qualify for a World Cup. And same situation. They get the draw in Algeria, and they in front of the Cairo International Stadium, 90, 100,000 strong at the time when it wasn't, an all-seater. And it was a really ugly match as well. I had watched the highlights. Somebody, I think Ayman Younes, an Egyptian player, had referred to it more of a war than a match. I had watched some highlights. Hussam Hassan scored in the first, I think, 5 minutes of the match. A very nice header. The Algerian players complained that it was offsides. It was not even close to being offsides, to be fair to them. Hussam Hassan went down later in the game, and he was laying down, an Algerian player walked by and literally kicked him in the head. So I think this one was more like, I think, of poor sportsmanship from the Algerian side, much like what happened in Angola in 2010, as Jonathan will be able to tell you. But what happened with the Interpol incident was that after the match, the Algerians were in very, very, very poor spirits, and I think some Egyptian supporters and delegations actually were in the hotel that the Algerian national team was staying in. Unclear as to what happened, what started it off, but I think bottles were flying, and the one that Lakhdar Baloumi allegedly threw ended up bottling, like you said, a doctor who was permanently blinded. So that was really an ugly incident, and really set the tone again for the matches that would be coming forth later.
So there's all that, background to this match, and so we kind of come up to the kind of more sort of into the 21st century. I mean, had there been many games between that one and then the one we're going to talk about now, where there was incidents and so on, or had it cooled at all? No,
not at all. No. Leading into, for example, the 2002 World Cup group, World Cup qualifiers, Algeria and Egypt were again drawn in the same group with Senegal. Senegal, of course, went on to qualify, and they had that fantastic World Cup performance where they beat the world champions, France. But Egypt were very, very confident that they could qualify. They were in the lead for a long time in that World Cup qualifying group. They had beat Algeria 5-2 in Egypt, and they just needed, I think, to win in Algeria. And I think Algeria held them to, it was either a 1-1 or a 2-2 draw. So again, there was that satisfaction of keeping your rival from their ultimate goal of qualifying for that World Cup. So that was another heated match, but there wasn't anything as ugly as what happened in 1989.
Yeah, okay. All right, well, let's have a quick break and then we'll talk about this match itself for qualification for the 2010 World Cup. See you in a moment. Welcome back to the Greatest Games on the Blizzard, everybody. Now then, let's get into it. So, yeah, November 2009. So, as Jonathan said at the start, the 2010 World Cup qualifiers, they were in a two-phase round-robin format. In the first round, Algeria received a bye. In the second round, Algeria finished top of a group that consisted of Gambia, Senegal, and Liberia. In the third round, they were drawn with Egypt, Zambia, and Rwanda. And as you said, Jonathan, you know, they both sides, Algeria and Egypt, were identical, finishing top of the group.
So when they first meet in the June, there seems to be there's a recognition this is a problem, and people go out of their way to try and calm this down. So when Egypt arrive in Algiers, the players are given flowers as they get off the plane. The doctor who'd been blinded is compensated. The Interpol arrest warrant against Baloumi is dropped. So that there's a concerted effort on both sides to sort of say, come on, let's put this behind us, let's get on with it. And that first game, Algeria win 3-1. So that's in the June. In the November, the final qualifier, Egypt have a goal difference. But basically, they need to win by at least 2 to catch Algeria. And in the first minute of the game, or it's the second minute of the game, sorry, they take the lead. And if you look at the footage of this, it's absolutely incredible. They must have about 4 shots in a row. The ball's bouncing out, and eventually it's poked over the line. And you got to bear in mind as well, this is an Egypt who have won the Cup of Nations in 2006 and 2008, and they go on to win it in 2010. They're a really good side. Hassan Shahata, the coach, is a very tough, very good coach of a particular kind. I'd been there in both 06 and 08. In 06, when they won it on home soil, was pretty unpleasant. The crowd in the Cairo International Stadium, sort of 100,000 capacity, and that stadium was always full 4 or 5 hours before kickoff. It was always massively hostile. I don't know if it's to do with the Mubarak government or whether it's just natural partisanship, but there was as an outsider, there's a definite unpleasant edge to the support. The semi-final in 2006, when they beat Senegal, and they get away with, I mean, some appalling refereeing. The final, Cote d'Ivoire complained about being intimidated, that the bus was deliberately held up so fans could shake the bus and whatever. And again, the refereeing in the final was pretty questionable. So I've been to a lot of football in a lot of different countries. I've never experienced anything quite as sort of intimidating as that stadium. And they take the lead, and the stadium's going berserk, and Hassan Shahata's going berserk. And Algeria hold out, they hold out. 1-0 is enough for them. And then in the 5th minute of injury time, Emad Metouab scores the second goal. And that means they've got identical records. So 4 days later, they have a playoff in Sudan. And for that game, supposedly it was 9,000 fans per team in a 40,000 capacity stadium. There was a lot more than 9,000 fans on each team there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we should say, Maher, that Algeria, when they turned up to Egypt in that game and they lost 2-0, they were under the cosh on and off the field. When they arrived, there's footage on YouTube that you can see when the Algerian bus is pelted, rocks thrown through for the windows, players are injured and so on. I mean, it wasn't the welcome that they'd given the Egyptians.
Yeah, and I mean, intimidating atmospheres are not uncommon in North Africa. Something that the Algerian national team experienced, for example, in that match in Cairo, was honking hordes outside the hotel until 2-3 a.m. They do that in Algeria, they do that in Morocco, they do that a little bit everywhere. It's not very sportsmanlike, but it happens. But the thing that really shocked and disappointed a lot of the Algerian population here was the rock throwing at the bus, because you ended up having 3 players that needed stitches, Khalid Lemouchi, Rafik Halish, and I think it was Rafik Saifi. for different injuries on their head, face, arm. And Algeria at the time wanted FIFA to step in and ensure that Egypt forfeits the match, because they said this is ruining the integrity of the sport because our players are literally injured. They cannot perform to capacity. In a match like this, where it's really a game of inches, we need this match to be forfeited. FIFA took time to do their investigation, and Algeria played the match. And like you said, it was a heartbreaking match for us, really an emotion of roller coasters. They score after 2 minutes. I think we're going home. We're not going to make it to the World Cup. Hang on until the very, very end, and then they score again. So it was an emotion of roller coasters. And that anger in Algeria really came to a crescendo after the match, because everybody felt like there was a real injustice that was done to us in Cairo. And we need to sort of avenge that in Sudan. And so there are political measures that are taking place. Free air tickets to Sudan by the Algerian government, no visa. The Sudanese government helped us, so we don't need a visa anymore to go. So travel agencies were crowded, and more than 12,000 were sent to Khartoum.
And I think one of the shocking things about that attack on the bus is the way the Egyptian press just denied it happened. Just sort of said, "Oh, this is a sort of a false flag attack. The Algerian players were breaking the windows of the bus because they wanted it called off." And this sort of one-eyed nature of it, and I think that was one of the things I found really disturbing, in 2006, was just sort of this sense of unreality about everything. And FIFA's investigation and the video footage makes it very, very clear what had happened.
Yeah, I found it interesting, seeing the footage of the players when they get to their hotel after that attack, and they are in shock and obviously a bit shaken up, and then they soon suddenly start chanting Algeria and all that kind of stuff, and you can see that they've almost sort of a switch has been flicked in their minds of, right, hang on, we're not having this, and obviously they go and lose the game. But as you say, playoff in one-off playoff in Sudan, and is it fair to say this is where you mentioned the countries both sending supporters? Is this where it begins to get a little bit more political than it might have?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. So right after Algeria lost in Cairo, actually, Orascom, which is one of the biggest mobile telecoms companies in the world, really, or at least in Africa, their offices in Algeria were ransacked, burned. Some Egyptian business here were also attacked. You could feel the ugliness really ramping up. Ambassadors were recalled to account for things from both countries. And here you have a very weird political situation, because you have Hosni Mubarak, the Egyptian dictator that was in power, I think, for more than 25 years, who is getting on in age. And a lot of people said that he was getting ready, he was preparing his sons, Ala and Gamal Mubarak, to sort of take over. And they were making very public television appearances at the time. They were in Cairo Stadium, they were in Sudan as well. Television would always pan to them. They would make these grandiose statements about nobody being able to touch Egyptian dignity. Any country that does that is gonna have to answer for that. And in Algeria, you had the president Bouteflika, who's now been deposed due to the protests over the last 18 months or so. He was actually getting ready to change the constitution to run for a third consecutive presidential term, because in Algeria it was limited to 2. And so he was sort of surfing on this to, look, we should deal with this football problem right now instead of the constitutional problem. He was actually sending Algerian supporters for free over there, and when the Algerian national team eventually came back triumphant, he had decorated the entire team with medals of honor and all that at the presidential palace. So it became very political over the next 4 or 5 days, really.
There were stories in the Egyptian press that fans of Egypt were attacked and had a lot of trouble in Sudan. I mean, were they a bit fabricated, or were there scuffles happening in Sudan between the two fans?
So I had a Sudanese friend that was there, Hadi, who lived in Canada, where I was at the time as well. And he was there, and he told me there was definitely an element of truth to it. The Sudanese government tried to suppress it and said there were 4 minor injuries after the match. I think the Egyptian Foreign Ministry said that there were 21 injuries of different severity. I think there was definitely an element of exaggeration, but I don't think it was a complete fabrication. I do think a lot of Algerian fans were so angry with what happened in Cairo that they did attack some Egyptian fans after the match.
Well, if we can, should we talk about the match itself? Because there was a game of football we can't forget, and not a classic. And as you say, it was all the off-field stuff that went on. But I mean, looking at that Algeria side, who were the key players for Algeria around this time?
The former Rangers centre half Majid Bouguera. He ended up having 70 caps for Algeria. Antar Yahya, who played for a lot of different teams in Germany, he ended up with 60 caps. He was the captain of Algeria in the 2010 World Cup. Another central defender. Karim Ziani, a little diminutive, attacking midfielder that was very, very good technically, but often held on a little too long on the ball. Algeria's national team was not really good. Rabah Sadan, the national team coach, I think had this really weird philosophy of just making sure he has his best 11 on the pitch and then trying to find a formation for them. I think against England, he played a 3-6-1. In the match in Cairo, he also played a 3-6-1, very weird formation. Whereas, as Jonathan pointed out, this Egyptian national team was really, I think, in my opinion, the best Egyptian national team of all time. They had, I counted it out. They had 7 players with that finished with more than 100 caps in their career. They were very experienced. They had already won 2 African Cup of Nations on the trot, and they were so good. But I think Jonathan probably has better.
Yeah, analysis. I mean, the team that won 3 in a row was pretty consistent throughout. And I'd been very skeptical of them in 2006. I thought they'd won the tournament because of the environment. And that may still be partly true, but in 2008 they were the best side there. In 2010 they were the best side there, and they were a team I sort of came to respect. So you look at that side, and Hani Said, the sweeper, was a great player. While Goma, he sort of played to his right, a great sort of defensive defender. But they had a really beautiful creative midfield as well. So Ahmed Hassan who played on the left. So it was a 3-5-2, and he played on the left of the 3 central midfielders. And he was. I mean, I think he's won the Cup of Nations more than anybody else. I think he's won it more than Nigeria. Yeah. I think he's won 5, hasn't he, or 4? He's won 4. 4. So he won it in '98, then 3 in a row. And he was this sort of like lovely player who sort of just did everything, but he was very creative, very elegant on the ball. They still had Mohamed Aboutrika as the playmaker, who is now in exile for various political reasons. They had Maher Mezahi, of course, we know from his days at Wigan and Hull. Emad Moutoua, who scored the second goal in the 2-0, who was just one of those players who always scored goals. He had a habit, I think in 2008, he had a habit of, he would always come off the bench and would always score. Oddly, I mean, I don't quite know why this would be. I don't know if he was injured, but the player who'd been player of the tournament in 2008, who was Hosni Abedrabu, was on the bench, and he came on for Ahmed Fatih. So they had Fatih and Mohammedi both played, who could both play right wing back. I think Fatih played in the middle of the midfield. Yeah. But yeah, he was a great box-to-box player. It's just a really, really good, solid team. Moad, the left wing back, he was there all the way through the golden period. El Hadari, the goalkeeper who played at the World Cup age, 420 or whatever he was. He was a complete pain in the arse. He was a great goalkeeper, but he had the lowest pain threshold of anybody I've ever seen. He was if you wanted time wasting in the last 20 minutes of the game, get him to take a goal kick and he wasted 18 minutes pulling his hamstring. He was always sort of crying as soon as they won as well. Just sort of break down. But anyway, very good goalkeeper. For all his limitations as a human being.
It's the man that counts, or perhaps
maybe that's unfair, but I didn't enjoy watching him, put it that way.
Sure.
So this was a very, very good team, and a team that knew its role very, very well.
Yeah, which is, I mean, surprising really that it was, when you put it like that it was Algeria who progressed. I mean, the Algerian player that perhaps Premier League fans will remember is Nadir Belhadj, who played for Portsmouth for a short while. And when I was looking at the statistics and the facts of this match, seeing him get a yellow card in the first minute was quite enjoyable, and I suppose could have set the tone really. But there were no sendings off in this game, and there was a handful of yellow cards, but not as many as it might have been. But watching the footage of this game, you can't help but notice when both teams come out, they come out at opposite ends of the ground. There's no teams coming out of the same tunnel as we're so used to seeing. That to me only adds to the occasion. That adds to the highly charged atmosphere, Maher.
And Antar Yahya, who ended up scoring the goal on the day, he was fairly incensed about this. He said they came down, it kind of looked like they came down from the VIP section on a sort of red carpet. And Algeria, who were very paranoid about everything, they were mad because they didn't have water in the changing rooms. They were opening up all the cabinets and the lockers in the changing rooms, making sure there was no microphones and cameras. And they had to come out of like a little tunnel, and both teams lined up. And that's when the Algerian national team turned their backs on the Egyptians too for the national anthems. So there was, I think, no love lost between these two sides. And it definitely showed on the pitch, like you said, with that the second minute booking of Nadir Belhaj with one of his many crazy tackles of his career.
Yeah, I mean, I find it interesting, Jonathan, when you see that kind of thing, and Egyptians coming out of the grand entrance, and they're coming out of the little one and so on. I mean, that does the team talk really for Algeria, doesn't it? That kind of thing, it winds up players, and they think, right, we're going to make sure we're not going to lose today.
And maybe it was
go on.
No, I said maybe it was a logistical necessity, but for Algeria, sometimes maybe for Algeria at times you just need to find a way to make yourself, rank yourself up. But yeah, go on, Jonathan. Sorry.
Well, I just wonder as well. I completely understand why it happened, but the Egyptian celebrations after the 2-0 are so wild and so over the top. Completely understandably, they in the 5th minute of injury time, they got the goal they need, and I just wonder if that sort of stiffened resolve, and I wonder as well if just that emotional expenditure. Whether that was too much, and then 4 days later to pick yourself up again and go again when you've had that enormous high, but actually all you've done is earn yourself another bite of the cherry, and Algeria are able to sort of reset and go, right, let's not have that happen again.
Yeah. So I mean, what do you remember from the game itself, Maher? How the kind of, obviously there's the goal in the first half. Were there many incidents that stick out?
Yeah. So like Jonathan, I think he expanded very well on the fact that Egypt were this beautiful, sort of free-flowing, attacking football side with, Mohamed Aboutrika at the eye of the storm, pulling the strings and streaking wingbacks. Algeria were a side that were very, very good at defending and very good at set pieces. And in a sort of cagey affair like this, I think this sort of match played right into their hands. And you add the sort of extra motivation about being attacked in Cairo and all of this. And I think Algeria were always going to win. So what I remember is a little scuffle in the first 5 minutes between Mourad Megni, former Lazio player, and the first new Zidane that sort of emerged out of French football in 2003, 2004, and Ahmed Hassan. So that was an interesting. As soon as they had that scuffle, I thought, oh, this is going to be a really, really cagey game, and I think that's going to play into Algerian hands. I remember the goal, of course, Hantar Yahya, and sort of ball being looped up over the Egyptian defense by Karim Ziani in the 40th minute. And what was interesting about that goal is that he had a very similar chance, I think, 10, 15 minutes prior, where it was him in approximately the exact same angle, and he shot it low, and Issam al-Hadri, the great Egyptian goalkeeper with low pain tolerance, saved it with his feet. And after the match, he said, the second time for the goal, he actually shot it. He just hit it as hard as he could, and it sort of somehow bounced in. But he said for the first occasion, he said, we hit it low and he saved it. We hit it high and he saved it. And then he said, so I decided to shoot it where the devil couldn't reach it himself. and that's a wonderful double entendre, because he might be calling Issam al-Hadri the devil. I think he has the same disdain for him as Jonathan. But that actually became it actually entered into the sort of, we call it a lexicon? Sorry, my English is not as great as yours, but into the football lexicon in Algeria, where if the ball hits the sort of 90-degree angle between the crossbar and the post, we call that the devil's corner because of Antalya. So yeah, that sort of prompted a great bit of football culture. But
the goal itself is slightly odd in that he's clear, because he's the left-sided centre back.
Yeah,
and he's gone. So Algeria have a free kick, so around about the halfway line. He goes forward for the free kick, and they mess about for ages. We have a sort of 4 or 5 passes before they put the ball in the box, which is really dangerous because the centre halves are all up. Yeah. But it's a really great strike. I mean, it's a lovely goal. It was a slight Van Basten element to it, of that sort of angled ball from deep, coming onto it on the angle. And it's not as good as Van Basten, but coming in on the angle, absolutely lashing it past the keeper. It's a lovely goal.
There's no way he meant to do it. I think he just hit it as hard as he could, and somehow went in.
Yeah, it's a great goal to win the game, of course, and that was just before half time.
Right.
I mean, into the second half, was this a kind of a nervy affair for Algeria? I imagine it would be, because as Jonathan talked about the attacking talent in that Egypt side. I mean, they managed to hold out, of course, but I can imagine you watching this game, getting through your fingernails, biting on.
Exactly. No, that was exactly it. Especially with what happened in Cairo when they scored in the very last minute. So you really knew that it was going to be a full 45 minutes of defending. And I think in the second half, I can't remember too many times when Algeria had an attacking occasion or when they were in the opposing half. It was all about sort of, if you get the ball, clear it into space and hope one of our strikers can hold it up, fall over, waste 2-3 minutes, play a small set piece, waste more time. And at that, when the stakes are that large, you really don't care about playing attacking football. It's been 24 years since Algeria had qualified to a World Cup, 20 years since Egypt had qualified to a World Cup. It's been dubbed the hate match. These two countries, everything is ramped up politically. You don't like them, they don't like you. With what happened, with everything that happened in Cairo as well, it was just all about making it through those 45 minutes with that 1-0 lead. And to make things even more nervous, we had our second goalkeeper in Fawzi Shawshi, who ended up having a pretty good game, but who ended up committing one of the worst blunders ever in the 2010 World Cup against Slovenia. He was actually in for Lunes Gawawi that had picked up an extra yellow card in Cairo. So we had our second goalkeeper in. We're not really sure how he'd perform. He ended up playing okay. But yeah, that whole second half, like you said, going through my fingernails, praying, and just like really whatever was left of my fingernails were sort of digging into my palms.
Yeah, you're up to your wrists at that point. Yeah. So Algeria qualify for the 2010 World Cup. What was the aftermath then of this game? Immediately after, what was the scene in the two countries?
It had been dubbed the second Independence Day in Algeria because there were literally hundreds of thousands of people on the street in Algiers, and it was like that across the country. Probably Algeria's biggest footballing exploit after beating West Germany in the 1982 World Cup. Just again, because of what it meant, because of the rivalry, everything in the case. I was in Canada at the time. I watched the match with 20 or 25 of my Algerian friends. As a 17 or 18-year-old, I don't know how old I was at the time, we just sort of grabbed an Algerian flag
and you were away.
And celebrated in the city center. So really, I've never felt that sort of ecstasy for a footballing match in my life before, as I did post-match. And in Egypt, it was the exact opposite. They had sort of phone-ins on Egyptian television complaining about the attacks that happened after the match. There was talk of completely ending diplomatic relationships with Algeria, which was actually quite a serious claim. So for them, it was really a catastrophe. And there was this development of the curse of, are we ever going to make it to a World Cup again? If this side, which ended up winning 3 consecutive Africa Cup of Nations tournaments, couldn't make it to a World Cup, when are we going to make it to a World Cup again? And eventually they ended up making it the next years.
Presumably the scenes in Algeria were probably quite similar when they managed to nick a point off Capello's England in the World Cup itself. But I'll leave that there. But before the World Cup happened, Jonathan, in 2010, the summer of 2010, they met again in
the semi-final of the Cup of Nations, and
enter Jonathan Wilson.
So the press box in Benguela.
I'd heard about this before.
Yeah, they put the Egyptian press at the front of the press box. They put the Algerian press at the back of the press box, and they had this sort of cordon sanitaire in the middle of me, Big Duncan White from Sunday Telegraph, David Ruiz from Marca, and there's an Italian journalist there, Stefano. I don't have a surname. He's based in London now, Stefano.
He made up that impenetrable wall to separate the two.
Well, I mean, 2 of us did. I'm afraid David and Stefano disappeared pretty sharpish as the final whistle. So Algeria win the game 4-0. Yeah. Sorry, Egypt lose. Algeria have 3 men sent off. Lose their discipline completely. Shaushi should have been sent off for a headbutt. So the referee, Kofi Kodja from Benin, he ends up getting banned for not having sent him off for the headbutt, even though he did subsequently send him off for a second yellow card. Right. So it's absolute carnage. There's an Egyptian journalist in front of us who sort of we sort of noticed that he was quite striking anyway. He had this incredible mustache, very carefully curled, like waxed mustache, and he kept on doing this thing. I don't know, maybe Mark can explain why this is so offensive. But he kept on adjusting his cuffs, and he was doing it very ostentatiously and clearly kind of doing it at the Algerian press behind me, and he was doing it the cuffs of his shirt sleeves and the cuffs of his trousers. And every time he did it, you could hear the kind of the anger getting louder and louder. So I don't know, is that a particular insult?
I have no idea. I know like this is like a sort of like
no,
it wasn't that. No,
it wasn't that. No, he was just ostentatiously adjusting his cuffs, and that for some reason in that day had become a massive insult. And so the final was, and I'm sitting there typing, I'm filing live. David and Stefano disappear, so there's me and Duncan left there, and as I'm sitting typing, got a file on the whistle, so I'm sort of getting to the last sort of 30 seconds before I file. And I just see this huge goblet of spittle fly over my shoulder. And then I sort of hear the Algerians coming forward. Duncan is enormous. He's like 6'7" or something. And so he's like holding them back as I'm kind of filing. And I'm sort of, Monsieur, je travaille, s'il vous plaît. And then the Egyptians they turn around. And so there's spittle flying, there's fists flying, there's things being thrown. And I'm still kind of desperately trying to file, get it sent, so pack my laptop up. We can't then get out because we're just surrounded. We're right in the middle, in the eye of the storm. And then suddenly you see these riot police coming in with batons, Angolan riot police.
Oh, wow.
Smashing the shit out of people. And I'm like, Jesus. Which my phone goes, and it's... it was Ken Early, who we've done the podcast with.
Yeah.
When he was working for Off the Ball. And he's like, oh, I see there's been a bit of trouble at this game. Can you... I'm in the middle of a riot.
Put me through.
So I genuinely couldn't hear a thing they were saying because it was so noisy. I was just describing what I was seeing. As the riot police sort of separate them. And Duncan and I got out completely unscathed, not even a drop of spittle. Somehow we'd been so in the middle of it, we got away with it. But just astonishing. And then in the mix zone afterwards, there's fights break out again between players, coaches, journalists. I mean, absolute nonsense.
But as an Englishman abroad, Jonathan, did you not wade in yourself?
I was looking for patio furniture.
Where's that when you need it? Blimey. Oh dear, my goodness. Yeah. So, I mean, absolutely extraordinary. I mean, Algeria themselves, obviously, in 2010 World Cup. Not a brilliant showing, but not the best. But 2014, if you fast forward to then, obviously a better showing of the World Cup. Second round took Germany to extra time in that match. I mean, so Algeria. What am I trying to say? They've this rivalry. You wouldn't really be aware of it so much in Europe, I suppose.
But it then reaches another point in the Cup of Nations in 2019 when Algeria win it in Cairo.
Yeah, that was an extraordinary affair. One you enjoyed, I no doubt.
Definitely, and our coach is a former international as well. I think he played in the 5-2 loss that I referenced in the 2002 World Cup qualifying, Jamal Belmadi. And I had picked up a few hints that he doesn't like Egyptians throughout the tournament. They were training at Petrojet Stadium, and at training sessions, for example, he would first complain that the pitch is not moist enough. He'd tell them to turn on the sprinklers. They would turn on the sprinklers, and then he would say after 2-3 minutes, all right, cut it out. And when they didn't cut it out, like in the next 10-15 seconds, he started yelling, these Egyptians, they're always like this. I know what they're about. They want my players to get injured. And one Egyptian journalist, in the final question of the final press conference after the final match, asked Jamal Belmadi, what would you say to Egyptian supporters that had been supporting you despite the rivalry during this Cup of Nations? And he finished, so this was the last sentence that any coach had said at the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations. He said, oh yeah, is that the case? He said, I must go see my ophthalmologist, my eye doctor and my ear doctor when I go back to France because I didn't see or hear any Egyptian supporters supporting us. And he finished it with that. So there were definitely some hints here and there, but I don't think the rivalry is where it was in 2009, simply because there are honestly two new governments, a completely new generation of players. Really don't see things going back to the way things were until there's a World Cup World Cup berth at stake sometime in the future, hopefully.
Yeah, well, and I don't know. Do we look forward to that? I suppose we do.
Yeah.
I suppose we do.
Maher, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about this. We could have talked for hours about this one. So thank you very much for giving us some highlights or lowlights, depending on how you look at it. But it's been a pleasure having you on the pod. Thank you very much. For more stories like that, do go to theblizzard.co.uk. Myself and Jonathan will be back next week with another great game from football. So until then, have a good one.